the 2020 presidential election. The former White House chief of staff, a key witness to Trump's efforts to remain in power after his 2020 election loss, maneuvered to provide federal prosecutors only what he had to. 8 candidates are announced for the first GOP debate, and Trump is not among them. 8 Republican presidential hopefuls will spar on Wednesday night in Milwaukee without the party's dominant frontrunner on the debate stage. Former President Trump's plan to have prominent surrogates make his case in Milwaukee without himself attending the debate may already be hitting a snag as he clashes with Fox News. Fox News, which is hosting the debate, will grant access to its spin room only to those aides of candidates who are participating in the debate. And as Texas borders efforts by Greg Abbott continue, some support is starting to wane. Governor Greg Abbott's intensive campaign to turn back migrants was initially welcomed by residents on the border in a community called Eagle Pass. This is where the main focus of the efforts have taken place. But now, after a couple of years, 2 deaths and lots of injuries of immigrants trying to cross into the United States, many of the Eagle Pass residents are having second thoughts about allowing the governor to use their property to continue his efforts. Binge drinking among adults aged 35 to 50 occurred at record levels in 2022. And this is according to some new research by the National Institutes of Health. A new study found that nearly 30% of people in this age group reported binge drinking in 2022. Use of marijuana in this group also reached historic levels, with 28% reporting that they engaged in the behavior. Now, this is up from 13% in 2012. And Mayor Karen Bass has ripped into Texas Governor Greg Abbott for busing migrants to Los Angeles during Tropical Storm Hillary. Mayor Bass said that Abbott sent a bus full of migrants to LA while her city was under an unprecedented tropical storm warning, which she called a despicable act beyond politics. Former President Donald Trump and his 18 co-defendants accused of trying to steal the 2020 presidential election are expected to be booked at the Fulton County Jail this week. Now, the facility, which is known for having some poor conditions and management and is actually under investigation by the Department of Justice, will be the site for Trump and the 18 individuals charged in that sprawling RICO indictment by Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis. The sheriff of Fulton County said that Trump nor the 18 individuals charged with him will be given any special treatment. They all will be fingerprinted, photos taken, or mugshots taken and processed in that Fulton County jail. You're listening and watching Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time, and in this hour, we go deep. We dig behind the headlines, and we bring you the biggest stories, making the biggest impact and headlines. And today it's all about voting rights and the impact that Trump's indictment for trying to subvert our democracy and nullify the votes of millions of people. What impact is it having on voters in southern states like Alabama, Mississippi, and in Georgia? Some voting rights advocates say that the 2020 election and its aftermath has left an enduring imprint on access, election politics, and simple trust in Georgia, which has become one of America's most pivotal swing states. These advocates point to the state's sweeping overhaul of elections in 2021. Republican legislators in Georgia says that the laws passed after the 2020 election were needed to bring about election security. Civil rights leaders and voting rights advocates say that's BS, say that many of the laws passed after the election were an attempt to undercut the growing clout of Democrats and Black voters in particular. Many of these advocates say that Georgia is involved, like states around the nation, particularly Alabama and Mississippi, that they're involved in voter suppression, that they are passing laws based on the big lie that the 2020 election was rigged, all with an eye towards suppressing Democratic votes and Black votes in the 2024 election. In this hour, I have my friend and co-founder of Black Voters Matter, Latosha Brown. Ben Harris is here. He's the chair of the Democratic Party of Mobile, Alabama. And Prentiss Haney. She's a co-executive director of Ohio Organizing Collaborative. These are all leading voting rights advocates. They're going to help us understand, break down what's happening around voting laws in southern states, and particularly some of the states that could be pivotal to the 2024 presidential election. When we come forward, more on voting rights, suppression of Democratic votes, and the suppression of the Black vote in anticipation of the upcoming presidential election, right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen.
We are back, and in this hour, we're talking about the impact of the indictment of Donald Trump and 18 co-defendants on voting rights in this country, particularly in states like Georgia, that has seen significant progress of registering Democratic voters as well as African-American voters. Joining me in this hour is Latosha Brown. She is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. She's been on the front line registering voters all over this country. Welcome, Latosha. Always great to see you, my friend. I'm in awe of all the work that you do around this country, working to secure the rights that voters in this country have, and ensuring that Black voters in particular have access to the polls. You wrote a very powerful op-ed piece that I read recently, and I just want to ask you about how your piece started. It says that Monday's decision by a grand jury in Fulton County, Georgia, to indict former President Donald Trump and 18 co-defendants for illegally trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election was a full circle moment for me and those of us at Black Voters Matter. What do you mean by full circle moment?
Well, one, let me first say thank you so much for having me on the show. I am always happy to be in conversation with you, my friend, who also constantly stand in the gap to not only speak truth to power, but to actually be able to expose our communities to these critical issues that are happening. When I talked about this being a full circle moment, I started with with a story around my grandfather. My grandfather was born in Alabama in 1905. He died at the age of 104. And most of my life, he actually helped raise me. And what's interesting is most of his life, he was unable to vote. He was unable to register to vote. It wasn't until after the Civil Rights Movement, and by that time, he was clearly close to his 60s. He may have been 60, come to think about it. And he would actually have he had this voter card in his wallet that he would carry around with him that was kind of beat up around the edges, but it meant a source of pride. I also remember my grandmother was born in 1910, and most of her adult life, she was unable to vote. And so when we went to vote, she would always actually dress up, they'd take me with me, and she would ask for her good pocketbook to take out of the chifforobe for us to actually go and vote. And so for both of them, they sent this really critical message that I knew that there was something that had been denied of them, that they literally really appreciated and valued being able to have their agency and go vote. And so I kind of grew up with that as a framework in my household. But then we fast forwarded, here we are in 2023 and 2021, as most people should know, in the state of Georgia, which I'm currently a resident, there was sweeping legislation that was passed to actually make it harder for us to vote. Not only that, but actually was punitive and penalized organizations like my own that would actually support people who would be in line, just support around providing water or pizza or chairs, just because people had been waiting in line. Oftentimes, sometimes in the lines in Georgia, it was 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, that there were people that I knew that actually stood in line for over 12 hours. Can you imagine? And so but there was legislation that was passed immediately right after this critical 2020 and 2021 Senate race in Georgia. And in many ways, it was meant to be, we believe, punitive, and it was meant to actually impact Democratic voters and Democratic-leaning voters, but also working class voters, regardless of where they were in the state, that ultimately there was this attempt to disenfranchise people. And so what I talked about in the op-ed, I talk about in the op-ed, one of just kind of my introduction to voting rights and how important it meant coming from my own family history, but also recognizing that in this moment, my work as an advocate is needed because we are currently under attack. That what we are seeing is we're seeing the rollback of rights. And it doesn't just impact, let me say this, it doesn't just impact the people in Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee and Florida. The truth of the matter is this last election with the U.S. Senate race that happened, it was literally Arizona and Georgia. There were states, one state was like in the balance that made the difference. You could be as progressive as possible in New York and California, but the truth of the matter is you can actually sway the entire national policy priorities in the country literally based on an outcome in a particular state. So we have to understand that the attack on voting rights in one state or in one community actually has an impact on all of us.
Yeah, it's so important because what you're saying happened after the 20 and 21 election in Georgia is this effort because they saw Democrats, they saw the number of Black voters that your organization and others registered. So there was these punitive laws passed. Now, the Republican legislators in Georgia say, no, these laws were passed to secure our elections. But that flies in the face of those same election leaders who say that there wasn't any fraud in the 2020 election, who defied Donald Trump and refused to, quote unquote, find him those 11,870 votes. So how is it that they are saying one thing, i.e. there wasn't fraud in the Georgia presidential election in 2020, but yet passing these very, very restrictive laws suggesting that they were shoring up something that wasn't broken in the first place?
You know, Areva, we are dealing with an old dog with no new tricks. The bottom line is we have seen this over and over again. We have seen this from the suffrage movement all the way from the civil rights movement. We have actually seen this. The truth of the matter is they just as you noted, you know, that even members of their own party really had the evidence that this was one of the most secure elections ever. The irony is, why is it in 2020, 21, 22, 23, people are standing in line for 10 hours to vote, right? Why is it so difficult? Why can't I move $1 million on my cell phone within a matter of minutes, but I have to stand in line for hours to vote? There's something fundamentally wrong with that. And we know what it is. It is an attempt to discourage people, it's an attempt to actually have people, working class folks, even time is valuable. I can't afford to stand in line for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6, 7 hours. And so the idea is to literally create this process to discourage people, for them not to engage in the process. If they were really serious about making it secure, then one of the ways that you make it secure is that you streamline the process, that you make the process as accessible as possible so that people can operate, they can actually participate in the election without any barriers. And so that in itself, we know that in itself actually cuts down the likelihood of any mistakes being made in the election. So the truth of the matter is, this is a concerted effort that is being led by a political party that unfortunately does not have the political ideas or the acumen to actually be able to sustain a multiracial, multi-generational coalition. And so what you are seeing is you're seeing more young people participate in the process. You're seeing more communities of color participate in the process, and that scares the hell out of them. And quite frankly, they have done everything they can to be able to marginalize those voices and those votes by putting up additional barriers, like purging the voting rolls, which we've just seen even most recently in the state of Georgia, where the hundreds of thousands of people have been purged the last few years from the voting rolls. That is something that Stacey Abrams' organization, my own organization, and others have actually sued the state around. What you're seeing is the takeover in the state of Georgia. You've actually seen the takeover of state election boards, that were members who actually have had been on those boards for 10, 15 years, who had a certain body of expertise, had just been indiscriminately taken off for no reason, taken off those boards. And particularly what we've seen is actually Black women being targeted in that process. You know, and so what we have to really recognize is that voting rights is under attack. Part of the reason why it's under attack is because we're winning. And what we're seeing is an electorate that is more reflective of the communities that we live in.
Yes, it's very clear that when Biden narrowly won Georgia in that 2020 election, the first Democrat to win that state since 1992, it scared the hell out of Republicans. Right. Trump, started screaming fraud, 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 started targeting Fulton County. That's the state. It's the state's most populous county, demanding a recount, demanding that, that he had won by 12,000 votes. And you mentioned Black women. So we know in this indictment, Fani Willis identifies by name Ruby Freeman, her daughter, Shay Moss, as two Black women who were specifically targeted by the Trump MAGA crowd, operatives that went to pressure them. And there's also the Fulton County, I guess he's the head of elections there. His last name is Mr. Behrens. I call him Mr. Behrens. He quit. He said the pressure on him was so intense. So given all of that, given these laws you said were passed, Latosha, what does 2024 look like? Should we be concerned? Are women like Ruby and Shay going to even be willing to work at polling places for fear that they will be targeted, that they'll have to move out of their homes, that they could be exposed to violence and danger? Are honest people going to work in polling places, given the kind of threats that we know have happened to those individuals who would not play ball, would not go along with the big lie, would not lie about the election being rigged?
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. I wanted to sing that song because that's exactly what we have to do. The bottom line is 2024 is going to be a fight. We have to keep our eyes on the prize. The truth of the matter is there has always been an attack on Black women who are leading on the front lines in this country. There's always been an attack of those who've actually stood in the space to speak truth to power and to organize folks to push up against the status quo. That has been the history of this nation. But there's also a history in this nation in which we resist, that Black women have put themselves in leadership and we've organized and we've rallied around each other to actually resist. The truth of the matter is when you look at what happened to Ruby Freeman, this is a woman who actually was going to help her daughter. Her daughter had been working and she needed some help. She actually made only $16 an hour. Think about this. This is a woman that was working, making $16 an hour, and she had enough integrity and enough courage that when they showed up to her house asking her to lie, we don't know what was offered to her, but asking her to lie, asking her to actually operate outside of integrity, she said no, even threatening her. And so I think that takes a lot of courage, that takes a lot of integrity, that takes a lot of insight. But hasn't that been the role that Black women oftentimes play in this society, that we stand in this space, that oftentimes we're the first on the first line to get that we're not recognized, but we will actually take the hits. And so what I think is going to happen in 2024, we're going to have to realize that we've got to fight like hell, that until we're able to actually right-size this thing, and it has not been corrected. The fact that we have a twice impeached president who is currently facing charges in 4 different courts, a man who has been accused by over 24 women of sexual assault, a person who his business has been, his nonprofit was basically deemed as a fraud, is the forerunner in the major party for the president of the United States. We have some fundamental democracy issues here. Democracy in America is fragile, and it's not just by one person. While he has his own issue, that I think this is a larger issue around the fragility of democracy, and those of us who believe in freedom, we've got to fight until it comes.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned, obviously, Trump, former President Trump, twice indicted, twice impeached, 4 indictments, close to 100 criminal charges filed against him. A RICO indictment, which is the most serious federal indictment or the most serious criminal indictment that you can imagine, filed, used ordinarily with mob bosses and mafia leaders. Now to have an ex-president and to have a judge in Fulton County admonish him not to intimidate witnesses, not to try to influence jurors, again, as if he was talking to a mob boss. Where are Republicans and independents in your work doing voter registration, doing polling voters? Donald Trump, by national polls, is still leading the Republican Party. And by some polls, he's running neck to neck in a general election with Joe Biden. Where are Republicans and independents in the state of Georgia as it relates to Donald Trump's candidacy?
I think he's going to have a hard road to hoe, as my grandfather used to say in Georgia. One, if you look at what happened in the last election cycle, there was some beef. There's still a lot of strain and stress because they didn't steal for him. He wanted those who had been in office, who actually had used the legal system in ways that I think lacked integrity, that he wanted them to push. The current governor, he left being very upset because he did not fine him those thousands of votes. Right. And so what we know is there's going to be, and I think in Fulton County, what you still see is there's some level of split within within the Republican Party around. There's 2 camps of Republicans. So this is going to be a tight race, I think.
So there is obviously bad blood because, as you said, he did not find those votes. Talk to us real quickly about Alabama. Alabama, those Republicans said they would rather defy a court order than to draw a map to create a second congressional district, as they were ordered to do by a federal judge. Obviously, that fight is continuing in the court system. But what does that say, again, about where we are in this democracy, that Republicans refuse to follow a court order to give voting rights to Black folks?
That says that we're going to have to hold them accountable, that they believe that they're above the law. Here it is, the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court, that is a conservative-leaning Republican Supreme Court, said that your lines, your maps are too racist, and you've got to go back and fix them, and then they refuse and defy that, that means that they have decided that they're above the law, and we're going to have to hold them accountable. We're going to have to organize, take it to the streets, whatever we need to do to say that you are not, in fact, above the law.
Thank you so much, Latosha. We are out of time. I know you've got to move on. You are a busy lady. I appreciate everything you're doing around this issue. We're going to stay in touch for sure. When we come forward, we're going to talk to Ben Harris. He's the chair of the Democratic Party of Mobile, Alabama, about more what's happening there to ensure that the line is being held. Again, thank you so much, my friend. When we come forward, more on voting rights and the suppression of the Black vote leading into the 2024 election, right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Good stuff, the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black. At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation in scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Connection established. Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a red spot. Shot with a red spot. Shot with a red spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Get off the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon.
We are back. This is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. And in this hour, we are talking about voting rights and the impact that Donald Trump's indictment in Fulton County, Georgia, has had on state legislators around the country, particularly in southern states, and how they have responded to the big lie. Latosha Brown just confirmed what we already knew by reports coming out of Georgia, that the Republican-led House in Georgia enacted a series of laws to make it more difficult for voters to vote, particularly Black voters, after the 2020 win of that state, victory in that state by Joe Biden. Republicans were stunned that Biden won that election. It's the first time a Democrat had won since 1992 because of the efforts of Latosha Brown, Stacey Abrams, and other voting rights activists in the state. They registered hundreds of thousands of new voters, and then those new voters, most of them Democrats, went to the polls in huge numbers and voted for Joe Biden, and in a narrow victory, he was able to claim the state of Georgia. We saw Raphael Warnock get elected not once, but twice in Georgia. Georgia now has 2 Democratic U.S. senators. So for all practical purposes, Georgia is no longer ruby red, even though the governor is a Republican and the House, their state legislature, is controlled by Republicans. It is a key swing state. It is a state where Democrats can win, as proven in the 2020 election. And because of that, it's going to be a key state in the 2024 election. And Latosha also reminded us all the votes for Democrats in California, New York, other blue states, obviously critically important. But because of the electoral process and the way that the president in this country is elected, and it's not by popular vote, is by electoral votes in the Electoral College, those certain states become key swing states and key to our ability to win the White House and to win key seats both in the Senate and the House. Ben Harris is joining us, and Ben is the chair of the Democratic Party of Mobile, Alabama. Alabama has been in the news lately because the U.S. Supreme Court basically sent back to the state a map that was drawn, gerrymandered map that reduced the number of congressional districts where Blacks could vote or had majority voting power, and said the way that the map was drawn to eliminate the voting rights, the power of Black votes, had to be redone. And basically that the state had to draw a map that created 2 voting districts, 2 congressional voting districts for African Americans. This is a conservative U.S. Supreme Court 6-3 conservative majority. This map was so racist that even they sent it back to the Alabama legislature and said, redraw it. Give the Black people who have a 30-40% majority in the state, give them 2 voting districts. And rather than comply with the Supreme Court directive, they defied it. They purposely drew a map that did not provide for that 2nd congressional district. Now, advocates, obviously, after the Republicans refused to draw a map that honored the directive of the Supreme Court, this matter is back in court again. A 3-panel federal court judges are now having to make a decision about what happens. Is the state legislature going to be given the opportunity to draw yet another map, or is a special master of sorts going to be appointed that will follow the directives of the court? Ben Harris, Rashad, do we have Ben Harris with us?
We're still getting connected.
Okay. Ben Harris, who is a Democratic Party chair in Alabama, we're getting him on the line. He has been intimately involved in this fight for African-American voters in the state to have a 2nd voting district. These districts, the way these maps that are drawn that provide political power to residents are so key. And literally, Republican-controlled state houses can draw maps in a way that dispossess African-American and other minority voters of their political power, of their political clout. And what that means is that a presidential election can be swung, a state Senate, U.S. Senate races, as well as congressional races can all be impacted based on the way these maps are drawn. We're going to continue to try to get Ben Harris, our Democratic Party chair from Alabama, on the line to get his take on what is likely to happen with respect to the redrawing of this court-mandated district in the state of Alabama. Stay with us. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm young, gifted, and black. At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest spot. Shot with a rest spot. Shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got
not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm back, and we are still talking about voting rights, the suppression of Black votes in states, particularly those in the South. I had hoped to have Ben Harris, the chair of the Democratic Party of Mobile, Alabama, joining me in the second half of this hour, but we are having some technical difficulties with his appearance. So I didn't want to end the show without letting everyone know what the status of this Alabama case is. As I said, a federal court determined that because 27% of the population in Alabama is African American, that was a large enough population geographically to allow for a second Black majority or near majority district to be drawn with respect to its congressional maps. The court directed that a map be drawn reflecting those districts. Alabama appealed that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they lost. The U.S. Supreme Court sided with the lower court and determined that, yes, Alabama should have 2 Black congressional districts. Again, this is so important because it controls congressional races. It has an impact on U.S. Senate races and definitely on the presidential election. The Supreme Court directed the Alabama legislature to redraw the maps and create that second Black congressional district in a complete defiance of the conservative U.S. Supreme Court. The legislature in Alabama drew a map, but it was not a map that gave African Americans the majority vote, didn't give them that second congressional district that they had been ordered to provide. So, as you can imagine, this matter is back in court again. The plaintiffs who have been suing the state under the Federal Voting Rights Act want a federal 3-judge panel to block the map that was drawn by the legislature from being used in the 2024 election. They want the map to be drawn by court-appointed experts, African-American leaders. The Democratic leaders in the Alabama state legislature say that the Republicans had no intentions of ever following the court order. They never planned to draw a map to give African Americans voting power, as was directed to them by the Supreme Court. And in fact, I read some reports from some of the Republican legislators that said they didn't want it on their political record. They did not want it on their records that they created a second congressional district. They said they'd rather be in defiance of a court order. They'd rather be held in contempt if that's what it meant. They would do anything before they would give Black folks the power the rights that the Supreme Court recognized under the Voting Rights Act, the rights that the Supreme Court recognized when the maps drawn by this Republican-led, predominantly white Republican-led legislature refused to draw a map reflecting the geography and the census data and the demographics of Alabama. And, you know, it's really, really, I can't underscore enough how painful this period in our country is, how shameful it is at the same time. The state of Alabama continuing to argue that its map, the redrawn map, is constitutionally valid, knowing that it defies the court order, knowing that it does not create a second Black district, all with the intent upon drawing this legal case out with the hopes that they will just run out the clock such that by the time we get to the 2024 elections, there will not be a second majority Black voting district in Alabama. This is politics at its worst. This is underhanded, it's deceitful, it's insidious. It is exactly what turns younger voters off. It's manipulation of the court process. It's everything people hate about our electoral politics. This one state legislature that has been told, that has been directed, that has been ordered by the Supreme Court to do something that they don't want to do. They just say, we're not going to do it. Now, this is the same Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade, and you saw Republican legislatures all over this country act very decisively, very quickly in ensuring that women's rights to reproductive health care, women's rights to abortion care ended immediately in their states. You saw them enacting laws that even prevented women from getting abortions in the face of incest, in the face of rape. So when the Supreme Court makes a decision that they agree with, that is aligned with their political ideologies, that is aligned with their so-called moral values, and I do use air quotes when I say moral, because there's nothing moral about the way these legislators are acting. But when there is a decision that they like, they run, not walk, but run to support it, to be in compliance, to enact laws, to pass regulations, to do whatever is necessary to, in this case, strip women and strip people of fundamental rights. But when this same court directs them to do something that will benefit our democracy, that will benefit Black voters, they now somehow, find this to be an illegitimate ruling, an illegitimate order by this same court, the same court that when it acts in ways to strike down affirmative action, or as I said, to strike down Roe v. Wade, they applaud, they praise, they acknowledge. But when this court tries to protect the rights of Black voters, tries to protect the rights of marginalized people, the rights of students, the rights of immigrants, then somehow the court is illegitimate. This level of hypocrisy is, quite frankly, disgusting, is sickening, is nauseating. And we as Americans shouldn't stand for it. As we heard my earlier guest, Latosha Brown from Black Voters Matter, say so eloquently, this fight is not over, and it's going to become more intense as the election of 2024 gets closer, as the fight for our democracy continues, as we watch this indictment play out in Fulton County, Georgia, as we watch the former president, who's now leading the Republican Party, have to face criminal charges in 4 different venues. And we continue to see Republicans, under the guise of supporting Trump for his policies, continue to hold him up as their leader. This should embolden every Democrat. This should embolden every independent, anyone that cares about our democracy, anyone that cares about justice, about equity, about women's rights, about children's rights, about the rights of the LGBTQ community, about the rights of Americans should be shocked, should be alarmed, and you're on notice, should consider themselves served served, because if we don't all stand up, if we don't all speak up, if we don't use our power and everything we have to push back against this extremism, we may not have a country as we know it. And I'm not trying to be dramatic or overly dramatic, as kids might say. This is just keeping it 100, keeping it real. We are at a crisis point, at an inflection point in this country, and we all have an obligation to do our part to save our democracy. And we do that by making sure we're registered to vote, and that we're voting, that we're supporting Democratic candidates, and that we are pushing back against the big lie and against extremism. We are out of time. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for being a part of Areva Martin in Real Time. You can continue to follow me and my conversations on all social media platforms at Areva Martin. And you can continue to follow all of the programs on KBLA. Make sure you download our app. And if you miss a day of Areva Martin in Real Time, you can check me out on my podcast, everywhere where podcasts are found. The next show coming up is The Raw Report with the extraordinary host, Robin Ayers, right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA